is a lot of work. Just plain work. When work at home is planned and organized for cooperation, there can usually be more time for leisure.
I'm certainly in favor of those things. Leisure, fun.
Who isn't?
Wouldn't we all be happier if we worked out a little system for living together in harmony?
But how can we manage them?
We'll have to work out the full answer together.
Say, Mom, you're swell.
Most family problems can be solved through frank and friendly discussion, which points the way to a happy family life.
You know, this is beginning to be quite a family project.
It certainly is.
All right, good morning, everyone. Hey, how many of you can relate to the two kids throwing blows? Yeah? Now, I don't mean you, I mean your kids, right? So, yeah, that's good old fun days, right? Actually, we're teaching that in our kids' class right now. So, all right. Well, good morning, everyone. It's good to see everyone. You guys are a little rowdy group on singing part. That's good. That's energy. That's good stuff right there, yeah? So we're in our series on the Imperfect Family. If you have a perfect family, God bless you, you could leave. We only accept imperfect people here, and so it's good to have everyone in an imperfect world. We're going to talk about that. The idea of the series is to bring health into a home and to teach us how to remove some of the dysfunction that we may have inherited in our life and be able to have a little bit of health, all right? So one of the things that I hear from a lot of parents, and today we're going to talk about kids, but not just your kids or grandkids. I actually have a title, and the way I do it is I have a series, a title, an outline, and a message, and I messed up on the title, and I put kids and grandkids, and I shouldn't have, so I flogged myself 50 times last night, and so I've been forgiven, and everything is okay. I'm a little sore, but it's okay. So anyhow, we're going to talk about kids in general today, and I think it's going to be helpful. Oftentimes I hear parents say, I wish we could go back to the good old days, right? When things were simpler and better and just easier. And everyone said amen to that. So what I did is I went back into the archives of advertisement to just kind of show you how simpler and wonderful the old days were and try to glean some wisdom from that, okay? So let's go ahead and take a look at the very first slide, all right? So here it is, right? So I can read it. I had to blow it up so I could see it. So for a better start in life, start cola early, all right? And then it says right underneath there, how soon is too soon? And then here's what it says. Not soon enough. Laboratory tests. Now, just as a side note, anytime anybody says about a laboratory and tests, moving on. Laboratory tests over the last few years have proven, moms, pay attention, that babies who start drinking soda during their early formative periods have a much higher chance of gaining acceptance and fitting in during the awkward preteen and teenage years. So do yourself a favor, okay? Do yourself, this is like the authority whip right here. Do yourself a favor. Do your children a favor. Start them with a strict regimen. I was reading this yesterday as I was going through, I was laughing. And I'm the only guy in this whole room going through my message and I'm laughing. Start them with a strict regimen of soda and other sugary carbonated beverages right now for a lifetime of guaranteed happiness. All right? So whatever you learned in health class is wrong, all right? In fact, right now, we got rid of the water in the children's area, soda, all right? It's soda, all right? So if you don't like it, too bad. We're just following old school wisdom. Next one, all right? The next one, this is what I tried to convince my mom of. Kids need the energy candy gives, right? And then right underneath it, it says, here's why smart moms buy candy in cellophane. Now, I'm guessing that's so they don't eat it by the handful. I don't know. They have to actually unwrap it and work a little bit. So anyway, soda, candy in the back so far, all right? Preschoolers, don't worry. We cut it up so they can swallow it. It's all good. Next one is sound wisdom right here, and that is from Motorola, right? Do we even remember what Motorola was? Motorola, how television benefits your children. So here's what it says right underneath it. Motorola, a leader in television, shows how television can mean better behavior at your home and better marks in school. There it is. So far we got soda, candy, and television. So some of you are thinking right now, I was a great parent. All right, and then the last one, and this is my favorite one, all right? The last one is beneficial to young and old, all right? Cultivate the Rainier beer habit. Okay? Now, in my world, habit, when it comes to alcohol, leads to a 12-step program. Okay? Just as a side note. So cultivate the Rainier beer habit. It brings, and remember, young and old, right? You see the little girl there. It brings the glow of health and gives a new lease on life. No medication can equal it as a tonic. All right. Now, we're not doing beer in the back. All right, and I'm just because I don't want you guys to leave me. I want to make sure that you guys stick it out. So there it is. So here's the wisdom, and then today's a very short message. All right, in fact, it's going to be over as soon as I sum it up. Soda, candy, television, beer. Goodbye, folks. All right. So who wants to go back to the old days? Probably not so much, right? So then I thought, well, you know what? We probably ought to look at what God has to say. Maybe there's some wisdom there, just as an outside hope. All right, so at the very top of your outline, Proverbs 24, verse 3, it says this, by wisdom a house is built, and it's not a structure, it's talking about relationships. So a house is not the four walls and a roof, but actually the relationships that are in the dwelling, all right? So it says, by wisdom a house is built, relationships are built, through understanding it is established. And established means to fit together or pin together, okay? So it's talking about, so wisdom, by wisdom, a house, the relationships are built, and they're established through understanding. They're put together. Each piece has a place. Each piece fits in. Okay? And then it goes on and it says, verse 4, through knowledge, its rooms, all right, are filled with, and what are they filled with? Rare, meaning that it's not necessarily something that we all have, right? So then the question is how do we get there? How do we have the relationships in our home fit together, working together as God desires for us to do, so that the house is filled with beautiful treasures, right? Beautiful relationships. And the series is about that. And so we're hitting each area of relationships, and we're kind of addressing some of the things and some of the concerns that we have. So today we're going to talk about children, and it's not really so much your kids or your grandkids, although that's what the title says, but it's basically kids in general. And we're going to look at a passage of scripture that I shared with you a couple weeks ago that Jesus spoke to his disciples, all right? And so if you have your Bibles, Mark chapter 9, and we're going to start in verse 33. So Jesus is on a journey with his disciples. He's been going from place to place to place. They come into Capernaum, and he goes into a house, and then he asks his disciples, he said, what were you arguing about on the road? Again, a couple weeks ago we looked at it, but I didn't give you the whole thing because I didn't want to steal today's message. And he goes on and he says, verse 34, but they kept quiet because on their way they argued about who was going to be the greatest. And remember, in verse 31, Jesus says, I'm going to get arrested, I'm going to be crucified, I'm going to be killed, and I get resurrected. And they're like, who's the greatest? All right, so it's kind of a weird thing. So verse 35, sitting down, that's a rabbi's position, meaning that you're the official teacher. So he sits down, and Jesus calls 12, right? So he calls the 12, the inner core of his guys. He calls them together, and he says, if anyone wants to be first, he must be the very last and the servant of all. Okay, and then I left off there, and I just talked about servanthood a couple weeks ago, and Pastor Eric mentioned about the serve cards. Verse 36, he gives us what that illustration is. He took a little child. People actually think that it's Peter's son. So they actually think that it was Peter's son. He took the little child and he had them stand among them. Taking him in his arms, he said to them, whoever welcomes one of these, and circle the word welcomes, whoever welcomes one of these children in my name welcomes me. And whoever welcomes me does not welcome me, but the one who sent me. All right? So he's not talking to parents necessarily. He's talking to the disciples. And he's saying, as adults, part of servanthood, right? Part of being a follower of Jesus is that we're going to welcome the kids into our life. Now, we don't understand this passage in today's world because we're like, whoa, I mean, how is that a stretch? Because in our world, families are one of two ways. Either children are nuisance, interruptions, or the children are the priority, right? And it's it. And so somewhere in the middle is where we need to land. We'll talk a little bit about that today. But in Jesus' culture, children were not considered anything of value. It was an extra mouth to feed who couldn't bring anything to the table because they couldn't work. You know, they're children. And so for them, it was one more mouth to feed. In fact, in those days, a father had full authority that when his wife, right, or concubine had a baby, they could decide whether they wanted to keep it or not. After birth, they can make that decision. Yeah, maybe I will, maybe I won't. Sometimes the babies would die. Sometimes they would be sent off. And remember, in those days, you didn't adopt children, you adopted adults. Right? So they had no rights, they had nothing of value, they had no power, they had no status, they were marginalized in every way. And so Jesus comes in and he says to his disciples, hey guys, if you want to be great, you need to welcome them in to your life, to welcome them to be a part of who you are. All right? So then the question is for us in your outline, when Jesus tells us to welcome them, what does that look like in our world, right? Now, whether you're a parent, grandparent, aunt, uncle, whether you have no children, you're single, whatever the case may be, this applies to you because there are kids around us, all right? And that Jesus is saying that we are to embrace them, we are to welcome them, and when we do, we're welcoming Jesus, but not just Jesus, we're also welcoming the one who sent him. Okay, yes, you could clap. One person. Not that I'm keeping score or anything. So let's take a look. So what does it look like to welcome them? So number one in your outline is that you have to embrace their life. Okay, so whether you're a mom, a dad, an aunt, an uncle, whatever the case is, that you need to embrace the children's life. And so it says in verse 36, Jesus took the little children, the child among them, and took him in his arms, and he uses them as that illustration. Now, not that they are the priority, because we don't want CEO kids that are running the show, but we don't want it to be where the kids are a nuisance, where they're just something in our life that kind of creates a problem. And we certainly don't want to vicariously live through our kids' life because our life was screwed up, and so we're going to have kids and we're going to somehow give them a good life, and so vicariously we're going to live through our kids. We don't want to do that either, but we do want them to be a priority in our life, okay? So in a book that Kara Powell wrote called Sticky Faith, and she says in her research, this is what she found. Research shows that every child needs 5 adults, okay, other than their parents, who will have a positive influence in their life. 5 adults who aren't their mom and dad, and you know, in some cases it could be a blended family, which would make things look a little bit different as well. But 5 adults who are not their parents, for them to speak into their life, and specifically when it comes to their faith in their life. Okay? Now just take 2 steps back. So Jesus says, if we embrace the kids, you embrace me, and you embrace my Father who sent me. All right? So we are to embrace them. So as a parent, we take a couple steps back and we say, okay, so how do I get 5 adults who are positive, who are spiritual, who are encouraging into my kid's life who aren't mom and dad? Right? And if I don't have kids and I'm an adult, how do I become one of the 5 that invest in other kids' lives to pour into them, to help them to have more traction in their area of life? Okay? Now what's interesting is every one of us, I'm guessing, could probably think back into our younger days and think about how an adult has spoken into our life that wasn't a mom and a dad. Okay? And so for me, I've shared with you, I'm dyslexic, I have a learning disability, I did horrible in school. It wasn't until my freshman year in college that I happened by God's grace to trip into a lady who was an expert at being dyslexic and learning disabilities, who helped me kind of navigate through school and be able to get through it. Prior to that, and I shared with this, and it's not a knock on teachers, all my teachers spoke the truth and said, Danny is just a below average student. And that was my reports that I would hear over and over and over. But I had one teacher in elementary school, right? And she taught 4th, 5th, and 6th grade, and I had her for my 5th and 6th grade year of elementary school. Her name was Mrs. Otting. And Mrs. Otting would pull me aside, and she would tell me, you can become anybody that you want to become. And then she would tell me about President Roosevelt, right? And I had zero interest in Clifford the Big Red Dog. All right, and I don't know if you guys read that book. I could care less about Clifford, okay? But I love baseball. And she said to my parents, she said, get them Sports Illustrated, buy them the books, about sports. So I knew every record about, I was a Reds fan, Johnny Benson, Joe Morgan, and Pete Rose. I knew all that stuff. She said, I don't care what they say. Danny is going to read that stuff because that's the only thing that he's interested in. Right? Then in high school, I had a teacher, my freshman year, I think it was my freshman year, I walked into his class. I shared with you last week about my older brothers. I walked into his class and he looks at me and he goes, his name was Mr. Huff. Some of you guys are Concord High graduates. Mr. Huff, I walk in and he goes, Buchert. Right? I just walk into his room. He's like, so, are you like your older 3 brothers, or are you like Billy, who was killed in a car wreck? He said, are you like Billy? Billy was a straight A student. Okay, my other brothers were not so much. And I'm like, well, Mr. Huff, I'm probably like my older brothers. And he goes, that's all right, we're going to get through this. And he gave me his home number, right? This is long before cell phones. He gave me his home number, and he said, if you have questions in math, give me a call. Now, probably he knew that he was going to save me from the journey of my older brothers. Right? Now, I never called him. I probably should have. Right? I probably should have. And then in college, in Bible school, when I went to Bible college, now that wasn't my teenage years, but I still remember it. I walked onto campus. I had 2 kids. I had left the world, and I came to know Christ in my 20s. And so I'm getting into school, and I am not the greatest student. And I walk in, and Dr. Beavers pulls me aside, and he went to school late in life. He had a couple kids, so we had a lot in common. And when I walk on the campus, he would always, hey, Buchert, come to my office. And, he'd sit down and he'd talk about school. He'd talk about ministry. He'd talk about a lot of different things. He was a preaching professor as well, and how to communicate and all that stuff. And what's interesting for me, I don't remember my kindergarten teacher, my 1st grade teacher, my 2nd grade teacher, my 3rd grade teacher, my 4th grade teacher. I do remember my 5th and 6th grade teacher. I remember one teacher, 2, maybe in junior high, right? And a couple in high school. And then my oldest son, Brandon, it became Jessup University, and Brandon went to that school 14 or 15 years after I left it. And so he had some of the same professors, and he's like, Dad, did you ever have so-and-so professor? I didn't remember any of them except for Dr. Beavers. And I said, take a picture, bring him here, and go, yeah, I kind of remember that guy, but I don't remember if I ever had a class with him. Right? Now, isn't it interesting that we remember the people who poured their life into us? right? Who poured their life into us. And all she's saying in her study is, whether you have kids or grandkids or whatever, that you need to be that one of the 5 that pour your life into, so that when they're in their 50s and maybe they're a pastor or a missionary or a doctor or, truck driver, whatever they are, that they remember you. They don't remember a lot of other people, but they remember who you were, right? Yes, and you can clap for that. So whether it's, teaching in a church environment, in a little league, a drama, whatever it is that you're interested in, you can find those kids to invest in. And mom and dad, if you have kids, you need to find those adults that they can invest in your life. You all with me on that? All right, the next one is important, and that is to understand their world. All right, so we're talking about kids today, so understand the world in which they're in. Now, my dad was 45 when I was born, and my mom was 36, and my dad was born in 1919, right? So my dad was he'd been worn out and was real tired by the time I came around. So my parents were really old in those days to have children, and so, praise God for that. Here I am. You don't have to praise God, I will. And anyhow, I'm here, and so I can remember my dad, and this is true in every generation. I can remember my dad, we're driving down the road, and I probably can't say this, but we would drive to the gas station, and I was like 7 years old driving the car. Okay? Is that legal? I'm not sure if it is or not. I mean, I was sitting on his lap, he was doing the gas stuff, but I was driving. Some of you are shaking your head like you remember those days. And so I would my dad would get gas, I'd get a big cherry, because that was what my favorite candy bar was. And then in it, so I would tell my dad, and I said, oh, that's bad. And my dad, right, was, just kind of a backwoods kind of guy. And he's like, now, Danny, is that bad good or bad bad? And I would say, whatever it was, bad good or bad bad. And he goes, I don't understand you. And then there's a thing that holds water back. You know that word starts with a D? Okay, he would insert that word. I don't understand a thing that holds water back. Kids, why don't you just say that that's good if it's good, if it's bad, right? So every generation, it's the same thing, right? So let's fast forward in today's world. So I hear these kids, and this has been a while ago, man, that's dope, right? And I'm like, stop, don't touch it, let's call the cops, right? Because we don't need to have that, because that's not good, trust me, right? Or they'll say, oh man, he's chill, right? And I'm like, wait a minute, is he got frostbite? Do we need to get a jacket? Do we got to turn up the heater? What do we need to do, right? So then in our community group, we had a bunch of 30-year-olds, so an old goat like me and my wonderful wife, and then a bunch of youngsters, and their kids are sitting around, and they're talking about the verbiage that they use, right? And their parents are like, well, what does that word mean? And what is that word? And the kids are, they're like 6th, 7th, 8th grade kind of thing, and they're like rolling their eyes like, oh boy, my mom and dad are so stupid, right? And I don't know what the words they were using, because I'm not in that generation, I'm well past it, but we need to understand their world, okay? Now, pay attention. Regardless of what year or culture or generation your kids are in or grandkids are in, there are fundamental questions that they ask. It is hardwired into their soul, in my opinion, by God. Okay? So in your outline, if you don't answer the questions that these children have at different seasons of their life, somebody else will. And as believers, we oftentimes have this conversation, and we don't necessarily like the answers that they're giving them. And so if you don't speak into and you don't embrace and understand the world in which they're in, someone else is going to speak into their life. Okay? So let's take a look and think through this. So preschoolers, right? Preschoolers have some fundamental questions. And this is regardless of what generation that they were born in. They ask, am I safe? Am I okay? And am I able? okay? If you're not answering that question, the world will answer it for them, okay? You may not like it, doesn't matter, right? So we have to begin to recognize that in the preschool mindset, they're looking for security, they're looking for confidence, they're looking for boundaries, how to create boundaries in their life. They're looking for that. They're looking for praise when they do something that is contrary to their nature. Okay, now I once said this, and I had a lady one time stop me. We're all born sinners, including those beautiful little children that you have, right? And by nature, they're selfish. Imagine that, right? By nature, they don't share. They're stingy, right? And so my wife, who does the preschool here, and she's done it for many years, I mean, she'll come back and she'll tell me stories about where a little kid will share something with a group, and Tammy stops the whole class. She's like, listen, boys and girls, let's all pay attention. Oh, so-and-so just shared their toy. Let's all clap, and isn't being generous a good thing? And all the kids clap. Now, probably not your kids, because they're like, no, I don't want to share, right? This is my toy, and I'm not giving it up. Right? But you have to praise them for something that isn't natural. I mean, think about this as a side thing. Come on, we cheer when they pee in a potty chair. Right? I mean, it's like a celebration when they go number 2 in the toilet. Right? Is it just my house, or was it? I mean, I was like 18. My mom's like lighting firecrackers off. Like, he finally went. Hey, I'm a late bloomer. What can I say? All right, sorry for that visual. Elementary. So elementary years. Am I worth your attention? And just pause for a moment. Just take that in. So a hardwired question for an elementary student is, am I worth your attention? Just let that truth roll over. Do I have what it takes? Do I have any friends? Right? And again, if we're not speaking into the kid's life, the world is. Right? The world is speaking into their life. And we can say and we can do and, pick it and whatever else you want to do. And I mean, all that's fine. But if we're not willing to welcome the kids, whether they be our kids or grandkids or nieces and nephews or our neighbor kids, and speak into their life, then the world is going to answer those questions for them. And we may not be that happy. And so we need to be interested in their world. If they love sports and you hate sports, learn all you can about sports. Right? I mean, when I had kids, I'm thinking, I'm going to teach my kid how to bat left-handed because I batted right-handed and I'm short and I can't play the middle infield. Who wants a right-hander that bats right-handed, that plays middle infield? Everybody has one of those guys. So I'm trying to teach my kids. My kids could care less about sports. Now my middle son is actually into the baseball type stuff. But at a younger age, I mean, they're into music, they're into all kinds of other stuff. You have to become interested in what they're interested in because you're interested in them. Right? And that is so important. Not what you're interested in, but what they're interested in. Middle school, what do? And I think somebody said, Mark Twain said, when they're in middle school, you put them in a barrel. And you feed them through the barrel, and then when they get in high school, you cover the little hole up, and that's it. Something like that. I don't know. I didn't read about Clifford the Big Red Dog. I read about Joe Morgan and Pete Rose. So, middle school, here's what they're asking. And this is physically, emotionally, and socially a huge change in their life. Okay? And they're asking, who am I? Who do I like? And where do I belong? And just pause for a moment. If you don't know what the world is telling them on those 3 questions, I suggest that you pay attention because what they're saying may not be your values in life. So you have to be creative in their life. You have to figure out ways. Part of them are saying, I want to be independent, and they're straight-arming you. And the other part of you, they're wrapping their arm around you to try to pull you in. Right? And so as a parent of junior high and even high schoolers, there's a mixed message, easy for me to say. right? On one minute, they're like, Dad, Mom, get out of here, you're a dork, right? On the other hand, they need you, right? And don't take the I don't need you message. They desperately need you. And let me come over here, yes? Let me come over here and say this. If you don't give them their attention, somebody else will. And if you're a dad and you have a daughter, and may I say, praise Jesus, I wasn't blessed with daughters, right? And I don't mean to say that in a bad way. I came from 5 boys. I don't know that I'd have been able to handle it. If you don't pay attention to them, somebody else will. And you will not like that person. Shall we go to high school? High schoolers, they want to know, why should they believe? Right? How can I matter, and what will I do? And these are questions that are hardwired in, and again, the world is responding to it. And we need to be proactive in answering those questions. Mom and dad, grandma and grandpa, aunt and uncle, cousins, neighbor kids, whatever it is, we need to know what the answer is to those questions, and we need to be speaking into the life that we become the 5 and the 1, that we speak into their life to answer those formative spiritual formation questions that they have in their life. Y'all with me? Number 3. The third one is, I got to hurry up, and that is modeling your life. Modeling your life. Now this can be, and I could do like a whole hour, probably 3 hours on this whole thing. This could be one of those things that you go, man, God is so good, praise Jesus. Or it can be an incredibly hard swallow in your life. Because we know this for our own life. We don't listen, we watch. Your kids are not listening to lectures. Your kids are watching your behavior. And you are modeling it. And this is why in postmarital counseling, for my part, it becomes difficult because I have to determine the level of dysfunction a family or a person has. We all have dysfunction. Some of us have a little bit of dysfunction. Some of us have a great deal of dysfunction. Now, the problem is that dysfunction is we don't know that it's dysfunctional, and we think it's normal. Right? So I have questions like, what do you mean you don't throw stuff in your house? It's like, no, in our house, we don't throw stuff. Really? It's like, no. We don't lock people out. We don't lock people in. We don't threaten. We don't use the word divorce in our home. We don't use certain words that are somehow an attack on somebody else's looks. We don't shame them in any way. You're like, really? It's like, yeah, really. Now, some of that we had to relearn, right? And apply it into our life. But we don't see because we're blinded to our level of dysfunction. And so if you were to pause and you were to think that you are creating a mini me, and the relationship that you're in is going to be what your children or grandchildren's relationship is going to be, are you excited? Or is it like, when can I start changing? Today. Right, today. Because the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. The things that drove me the most crazy about my 3 sons were the things that I struggled with internally, personally. And they drove me nuts. Right? And if we had conflict, that was it. Because it was me. And I hated it in me, and I was seeing it in them. Right? And they could argue with a fence post. And I can argue with a fence post, right? Through some spiritual maturity, I just argue with not fence posts, but actually the boards on the fences, not so. I graduated, so. So here we go. Are you all ready? Relationships, letter A in your outline, right? And Jesus says in Matthew 5:14, he talks about us being the light of the world and let your light shine. I don't running out of time. So relationships. You are modeling relationships for your kids, your grandkids, and your neighbor kids. How to communicate, how to resolve conflict, how to overcome differences, how to resolve just life issues, right? You are modeling that for them. Okay? Now, if you don't like it, then change your way. If you like it, keep doing it. Right? But you have to recognize that that is exactly how they're going to resolve conflict in the home. Okay? If you throw things, lock the door, lock them in, threaten them, all that stuff, that's what they're going to do. The other thing, do you help your kids select the right friends? I've heard this from many, many parents. They actually like apologize about their kids are hanging out with people that may not have the greatest of character and all this other stuff. And I said, you're the parent. Parent them, right? Pull the string on them. Just say, no, you're not going to go over to Buchert's house anymore. These kids are nuts. That's me, by the way, right? So be it, right? I mean, you have to make that decision for them. In 1 Corinthians 15, verse 33, do not be misled. Bad company corrupts good character. Okay? The next one is character. Okay? Character. and that is, in your outline, just a simple formula. Character is the sum total of the choices that a person makes and the habits that they have in their life. So if you want to know if you have good character, the question is tell me about your choices that you make and habits that you have in your life. If you do not have good choices and good habits, you don't have good character. Okay? Same as in your kids' life. You need to model good choices and good habits in your kids' life or grandkids' life or however that works. Okay? And remember, all of this is caught, not taught. Okay? Letter C in your outline is values. And boy, do I wish that I had 3 hours on this because I could tell you stories that would make the hair on the back of your neck stand up, even if you don't have any, right? And that is, you are shaping the values of the little ones around you. Okay? Not by sitting them down and giving them a lecture, but by what you do in life. Okay? So they're watching how you handle life, how you handle work, how you handle your money. Not what you tell them, but by what you buy. Okay? About sex, about the future, about a biblical worldview, about history. You are modeling all that for them. They are looking at you and they are gleaning from that. Okay, one of the lessons that I learned from my dad worked for the government for like 40 some odd years, and he wasn't, and this is no knock to if you're a bureaucrat, he didn't have the idea that I'm a bureaucrat, no one can fire me, so I don't really care if I do my job. His is completely the opposite. Not that anybody in the government thinks that way. All right. Some of you are like, wait a minute, that's offensive. It's like, all right, come back next week. I won't offend you as much. So here's his idea. His idea was this, that you are the best employee that you can be. And he would work this way, and that you become so valuable to your boss that when layoffs come around, they will do anything just to keep you around because they don't want to lose you. That was instilled into my life. Okay? And then even as a young kid. And then he used to say this, and I still use it today. He used to say, and don't expect your boss to pat you on the back all the time. That check that you get on Friday once a week, once a month, once every 2 weeks, that is your thank you card. Every week they give you a thank you card. Aren't you lucky? Right? Now I'm like 20 years old, I start working at Alhambra Water. It's basically a bunch of truck driver teamsters, okay? We're supposed to be tough and hard and all this other stuff. And you can't say girls in church, but they're wimps. They're whining about everything. If you're a teamster, you could see me out afterwards and I'll give you names, okay? They're crying, oh, it's so hard and it's heavy and there's so many steps and boss, could you reduce my workload? It's so bad. It's like, what a bunch of wimps. And then at 22, I'm telling guys that like in their mid-40s, let me tell you something. You go in and you be the best driver that you can be. And when it comes slow and the water starts not selling as much as it is now, the boss is going to do everything they can to keep you around. And they're not going to send you back to the union to sit on the bench and sit on the roll. And that check that you get every Friday, that is a thank you card that says, thank you for working hard. And they look at me like, where'd this little guy come from? Right? But that is a value that I have had in my life because my dad demonstrated it in his life. Right? And when everyone else was doing the stuff that they could do because they were part of the government, he never did. He didn't believe that. He believed that he worked for the people, not for the organization or the federal government. And that you were the best employee that you could be. Right? And that is a value that you teach. So when it comes to work, how are y'all doing? And then last is priorities. You are modeling your priorities in your life. In Matthew chapter 6, verse 33. But seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and then all these things will be given to you as well. Right? So below it, I have this. We need to set the priorities prior to the activities. So you hear me say this all the time. God is number one. Your spouse is number 2, your kids are number 3, your job is number 4, Ephesians 4 and 5. Okay? So let me just ask, when it comes to activities in your life, do they represent God as number 1, or are the activities in your life pulling you away from God as your number 1? If you're married, is your spouse number 2, or are the activities in your life pulling you away from your number 2? If your children are number 3, are your activities pulling you away from your children? And who cares about 4 work? I don't need to talk about that. But are your activities supporting those values in your life? See, if we say that they are and they're not, our kids can see through it. They see through the hypocrisy in our life. Right? And we are shaping and molding those children. They are catching all that we're modeling for them in life. And I just, as an encouragement to you, because I know it can be a lot that we went through today, some of you are like, oh no, I got to start over. That's great. I mean, we worship a God who doesn't focus on where we've been, but on where we're going, right? It's not where our feet have been, it's where our feet are going. And God can make the difference. If you sit back and you think, oh man, I screwed up, my kids are raised and I screwed up, and I'd say all this, say this. Listen, that chapter may be over, but the book isn't finished. Right? And make the changes, own up to whatever it is that you've done wrong, own up to it. Let them know that hey, if I would have known this 40 years ago, it would be different. Quick story, then we'll pray. So years ago, Brandon, who's the youth pastor here, we were going to Disneyland, right? Someone reminded me of this conversation. So he's a little guy, like I'm a little guy. We're geniuses, but we're short in size. I don't need to get into that. So anyway, I don't know what the age was at that time at Disneyland, but he missed it by a year, right? Whatever it was. 4, if you're 4, you get less than if you're 5, right? And so I told him, you're 4. Right? Just say that. You're not 5. He's like, Dad, I'm 5. It's like, no, you're 4. For this vacation, you're 4. Right? Because I was going to save, I don't know, $25 or whatever it was. So then we go to Disneyland, we do all this stuff, and everything's fine. And then all of a sudden, I'm going through my quiet time. And isn't God beautiful? Right? Isn't he beautiful? And it's like, knock, knock, knock. It's like, yeah, God. How old's your son? I don't want to talk about it. Right? Are you talking about like when he was like conceived, or you know how you play all those games? It's like, well, actually he is, It's like, no, how old was he? So I ended up going back in one evening in his room. He was laying in bed, and I went in and I said, hey, Brandon, you know what I did was wrong. Right? And I asked God to forgive me, and I ask you to forgive me. Right? And there's nothing wrong with being honest and transparent to our kids, regardless if they're little and we screwed up or they're older and we screwed up. To go back to them and say, if I had it all over, it would be different. But I pray that we move forward in a great way. Let's pray. Father, thank you for your love and grace. Father, thank you for this opportunity to gather. And Lord, my prayer is that each of us would invest in and welcome the children, whatever that may look like for us individually, whether we're the 1 in 5 adults that invest in someone else's kids, our grandkids, or Lord, whether it's our neighbor kids, whatever the case may be, Lord, give us that guidance and direction. And for the parents that are here today, Lord, I pray that you will give them wisdom and discernment. Lord, that you will lay on their minds 5 people, 5 adults that are positive, spiritual folks to invest in their kids' life. And Lord, I pray that the seeds that are planted will take root and that we will see the next, whatever it is, business people, truck drivers, pastors, missionaries, whatever it is, but kids who love Jesus in their life. Thank you again for this opportunity to gather. We give you all the praise and all the glory. And all God's people said, Amen. I went long. God bless you. We'll see you on the way out.
Yeah, yeah.